former adult film star, accused of killing her ex after marrying his son. This is the story of Devon Michaels, a 45-year-old Nevada woman and former adult film actress who stands accused of one of the most disturbing crimes Henderson, Nevada has ever seen. She's charged with the murder and decapitation of her ex-partner, 47-year-old Jonathan Wulette. But this isn't just a murder case. This is a story about betrayal, twisted family dynamics, and a crime so shocking that even seasoned investigators were left disturbed by what they found. In August 2023, Henderson Police Department officers responded to a welfare check at Jonathan Wulette's home. Someone had reported that they hadn't heard from Jonathan in several days, which was unusual. He wasn't answering his phone. He hadn't shown up to work. His friends were worried. When officers arrived at the residence, they knocked on the door. No answer. They peered through the windows. What they saw inside would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Jonathan's body was lying in his living room, but something was horribly, terribly wrong. His head was missing, completely severed from his body. Officers immediately called for backup and forced entry into the home. The scene inside was nightmarish. Jonathan Wulette's decapitated body was sprawled on the floor. Blood had pooled around the corpse, but his head was nowhere to be found. Police searched every room of the house. They checked closets, cabinets, under beds, in the garage. They searched the backyard, the trash cans, the surrounding property. The head was gone. To this day, more than a year later, Jonathan Wulette's head has never been located. But the missing head wasn't the only disturbing element of the crime scene. There was a strong, acrid chemical smell permeating throughout the house. The odor was so powerful that officers had to open windows and doors to ventilate the area. When investigators examined Jonathan's body more closely, they discovered why. Someone had poured industrial-strength chemicals all over the corpse. Fumes were still rising from the body when police arrived. The chemicals appeared to be some kind of cleaning solution or solvent, possibly used in an attempt to destroy DNA evidence or accelerate decomposition. Crime scene technicians had to wear protective gear while processing the scene due to the chemical contamination. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was calculated, deliberate, and brutal. Investigators immediately began working to piece together what had happened. Who would want Jonathan Wulette dead? Who would have the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit such a heinous crime? The answer came quickly: Devon Michaels. Devon had a long and complicated history with Jonathan. They had been in a relationship for years. During that time, they had 2 children together. By all accounts, their relationship had been tumultuous. Friends described it as on again, off again, with frequent arguments and periods of separation. Eventually, the relationship fell apart completely. Jonathan and Devon split up, though they continued to co-parent their 2 children. But here's where the story takes its first bizarre twist. After separating from Jonathan, Devon began a new relationship, and the man she chose to be with was someone who made the situation incredibly awkward. She started dating Deviierre Wulette, Jonathan's son. Yes, you heard that correctly. Devon Michaels, after ending her relationship with Jonathan Wulette, entered into a romantic relationship with his son. Deviierre had been her stepson during her relationship with Jonathan. He had watched her parent her half-siblings. He had seen her as a parental figure, a stepmother for years, and now, suddenly, she was his girlfriend. The age difference between Devon and Deviierre was significant, though not illegal. Devon was in her early 40s. Deviierre was in his late 20s. When they first met, when Devon first got together with Jonathan, Deviierre had been a teenager. Now he was an adult, and Devon saw him differently. Or perhaps she had always seen him differently and only acted on it after splitting from Jonathan. We may never know when their relationship truly began. What we do know is that after Devon and Jonathan separated, Devon and Deviierre's relationship became public. They didn't hide it. They moved in together. They appeared in public as a couple, and eventually they got married. Devon Michaels married Deviierre Wulette, the son of her ex-partner and the stepson she had helped raise. Think about the family dynamics for a moment. Devon had 2 children with Jonathan. Those children were Deviierre's half-siblings. Now Devon was married to Deviierre. So Deviierre, who was the half-brother to Devon's children, was now also their stepfather. Deviierre was simultaneously their half-brother and their stepfather. Devon was their mother and also the wife of their half-brother. It was a family tree that had twisted back on itself in the most uncomfortable way possible. And at the center of this dysfunction was Jonathan Wulette, the man who had once been Devon's partner and was still the father of her children. How did Jonathan feel about this arrangement? According to people who knew him, he was furious. He felt betrayed by both Devon and his own son. He struggled to understand how Deviierre could enter into a relationship with his father's ex-partner. He was angry that his children were being raised in such a bizarre family situation. Friends say Jonathan had confronted both Devon and Deviierre about the relationship multiple times. The conversations were heated and unproductive. Deviierre insisted that he and Devon were in love and that Jonathan needed to accept it. Devon claimed that her relationship with Deviierre was none of Jonathan's business. Jonathan couldn't let it go. It ate at him. It affected his relationship with his son. It complicated his co-parenting relationship with Devon, and according to prosecutors, it may have motivated Devon to make a terrible decision. When police began investigating Jonathan's murder, Devon quickly became the primary suspect. She had motive. Jonathan was a constant source of tension in her new marriage. She had means. She had access to Jonathan's home through custody, exchanges with their children, and she had opportunity. She had been one of the last people to see Jonathan alive. Detectives brought Devon in for questioning. At first, she denied any involvement in Jonathan's death. She claimed she hadn't seen Jonathan in days. She said she had no idea what had happened to him. But as the interrogation continued, her story began to fall apart. Investigators had evidence placing her at Jonathan's house on the day he died. They had surveillance footage showing her car in the neighborhood. They had phone records contradicting her timeline. Faced with this evidence, Devon changed her story. She admitted that she had been at Jonathan's house. She said they had gotten into an argument. The argument had escalated. Things had gotten physical. And then she made a stunning admission. She told detectives that she had hit Jonathan over the head with a wooden stick. She said the blow had caused him to go limp. She said he had collapsed to the floor. Detectives pressed her for more details. What happened after Jonathan went limp? How did his head end up separated from his body? Where is the head now? Why were there chemicals poured all over the corpse? Devon's answers became vague and confused. She said she couldn't remember what happened next. She claimed that her memory of the events was fuzzy and incomplete. She couldn't explain how Jonathan's head had been severed. She didn't know where the head was. She had no explanation for the chemicals. The detective conducting the interview asked her a direct question. Is it possible that you killed Jonathan and don't remember doing it? Devon's response was chilling in its ambiguity. Yes, she said, that's very possible. That statement would become one of the key pieces of evidence in the case against her. She had essentially admitted that she could have committed the murder, even if she couldn't recall the specific details, but prosecutors weren't satisfied with a vague admission. They wanted to understand exactly what had happened in that house. They wanted to know why Devon had decapitated Jonathan. They wanted to know what she had done with his head, and they wanted to present a clear motive to the jury. Deputy District Attorney Christopher Giordani was assigned to prosecute the case. He spent months building a case against Devon, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and constructing a narrative that would make sense to a jury. When the case finally went to trial, Giordani presented his theory to the court. He argued that Devon had killed Jonathan because she wanted a fresh start. She wanted to build a new life with Deviierre, her new husband. She wanted to raise her children with Deviierre without the constant interference and judgment from Jonathan. As long as Jonathan was alive, he would be a problem. He would continue to criticize her relationship with Deviierre. He would continue to make custody exchanges awkward and difficult. He would continue to poison their children against the idea of their mother being with their half-brother. This is the future that she saw and that she wanted, Giordani told the jury, and the only way to have that future was with John out of the picture. In the prosecution's version of events, Devon had gone to Jonathan's house with a plan. She had brought the wooden stick with her, or she had grabbed it once inside the house. She had confronted Jonathan, perhaps under the pretense of discussing the children or custody arrangements, and then when the moment was right, she had attacked him. The blow to the head had knocked Jonathan unconscious, but Devon hadn't stopped there. She had then retrieved tools from somewhere in the house or from her car, a saw perhaps, or a large knife, and she had proceeded to decapitate the unconscious or recently deceased Jonathan Wulette. The act of decapitation would have taken time. It would have been messy and difficult. It would have required determination and a shocking lack of empathy. After severing the head, Devon had removed it from the scene. Prosecutors theorized that she had placed it in a bag or container and taken it with her when she left. She may have disposed of it in a dumpster, buried it in a remote location, or destroyed it in some other way. Wherever Jonathan Wulette's head ended up, Devon wasn't talking. After removing the head, she had attempted to cover her tracks. She had poured industrial chemicals over Jonathan's body, possibly hoping to destroy DNA evidence or to obscure the time of death. Then she had left the scene and returned to her life with Deviierre and the children. She had waited for someone else to discover the body. She had planned to act shocked and innocent when the police came calling, but the evidence had been too strong. Her lies had been too transparent, and her eventual admission that she had hit Jonathan with the stick had sealed her fate. At least that's what the prosecution argued. But Devon's defense attorney, Robert Draskovich, had a very different story to tell. Draskovich stood before the jury and presented an alternative theory of the crime. He argued that Devon Michaels did not kill Jonathan Wulette. Instead, he suggested that the real killer was Deviierre Wulette, Jonathan's own son, Devon's husband. Draskovich pointed out that Deviierre had his own motives for wanting his father dead. The relationship between Deviierre and Jonathan had been destroyed by Deviere's decision to marry his father's ex-partner. Jonathan had been angry with Deviierre, disappointed in him, disgusted by his choices. That kind of rejection from a parent could drive someone to violence. Furthermore, Draskovich argued, Deviierre had just as much to gain from Jonathan's death as Devon did. With Jonathan out of the picture, Deviierre and Devon could raise the children without interference. Deviierre would no longer have to face his father's judgment and anger. The awkward family dynamic would be simplified. The defense attorney urged the jury to look at the motivations before reaching a verdict. He suggested that Deviierre had committed the murder and that Devon, out of love and loyalty to her husband, had taken the fall for him. Perhaps she had been present when Deviierre killed Jonathan. Perhaps she had helped clean up the scene. Perhaps that's why she could remember hitting Jonathan with the stick, but couldn't remember the decapitation, because she hadn't done that part. Deviierre had. It was a compelling alternative theory, but there was one major problem with it. The police had never identified Deviierre as a suspect. They had investigated him, certainly. Any family member would be looked at in a murder case, but they hadn't found any evidence linking Deviierre to the crime scene. No DNA evidence, no fingerprints, no witnesses placing him at Jonathan's house on the day of the murder. And crucially, Devon herself had never accused Deviierre of being involved. She had never said, "My husband did it, not me." She had only said that she couldn't remember the details of what had happened after she hit Jonathan with the stick. If Deviierre had really committed the murder, why wouldn't Devon just say so? Why would she protect him at the cost of her own freedom? The prosecution argued that the defense's theory was nothing more than a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. There was no evidence supporting it. It was pure speculation designed to confuse the jury. But Draskowicz persisted, hammering home the idea that Deviierre was the real killer throughout the trial. As the trial progressed, more details about the case emerged. Forensic experts testified about the crime scene. They explained how the decapitation had been performed. They discussed the chemicals that had been poured on the body. They presented DNA evidence that placed Devon at the scene. Medical examiners testified about Jonathan's injuries. The blow to the head from the wooden stick had been severe. It likely would have rendered Jonathan unconscious immediately. It may even have been fatal on its own. But the decapitation had been performed post-mortem, after Jonathan was already dead. This suggested that the killing had two phases. First, the violent blow to the head that caused death, and second, the calculated act of removing the head and disposing of it. Why remove the head? Prosecutors suggested several possible reasons. One possibility was that Devon wanted to prevent identification of the body, though this seemed unlikely since the body was found in Jonathan's own home. Another possibility was that she wanted to take a trophy, some kind of sick memento of what she had done. But the most likely explanation, prosecutors argued, was that Devon had removed the head to make the crime seem more shocking and random. If the murder looked like the work of a deranged stranger rather than someone Jonathan knew, Devon might be able to deflect suspicion from herself. Of course, that plan had failed. The evidence pointing to Devon had been overwhelming from the start. Witnesses testified about the relationship between Devon, Jonathan, and Deviierre. Friends of Jonathan took the stand and described how angry and hurt he had been about Devon's marriage to his son. They recounted conversations in which Jonathan had said he would never accept the relationship. Some witnesses testified that Jonathan had talked about changing his will to ensure that Deviierre wouldn't inherit anything. Others said Jonathan had been considering filing for full custody of his two children with Devon, arguing that the living situation with Deviierre was harmful to the kids. All of this painted a picture of a man who was actively threatening Devon's new life. And in the prosecution's narrative, that's why Devon had decided he needed to die. But perhaps the most dramatic moment in the trial came when the prosecution played the recording of Devon's police interrogation. The jury heard Devon's voice admitting to hitting Jonathan with the stick. They heard her describe how he had gone limp and collapsed. They heard the detective ask her if she had killed Jonathan, and they heard her ambiguous, chilling response, "Yes, that's very possible." The courtroom was silent as the recording played. Devon sat at the defense table staring straight ahead, showing no emotion. When the recording ended, several jurors were seen shaking their heads. The trial seemed to be going badly for Devon, but then came another unexpected twist. In 2024, before the trial had concluded, Devon reached a deal with prosecutors. She agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange, the prosecution would recommend a sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison rather than pushing for first-degree murder and a potential life sentence. It seemed like the case was over. Devon had admitted her guilt. She would be sentenced and sent to prison. Jonathan's family could have some closure, but then, in the summer of 2024, something unexpected happened. Devon withdrew her guilty plea. She filed paperwork with the court, stating that she no longer wished to accept the plea deal. She wanted to go to trial after all. She wanted to fight the charges. Legal experts were baffled by the decision. Devon had already admitted guilt. The evidence against her was strong. Why would she suddenly change her mind and risk a much harsher sentence? In a statement to the court, Devon offered a cryptic explanation. "I know right now no one in the family is going to believe me," she said. She didn't elaborate on what she meant. Was she planning to claim innocence? Was she going to blame Deviierre after all? Was she going to present some new evidence or theory that would exonerate her? No one knew. And so the trial continued, with Devon now fighting the charges instead of accepting responsibility. The decision to withdraw her guilty plea raised new questions about her mental state. Was Devon rational? Did she understand the gravity of her situation? Or was she suffering from some kind of delusion or psychological break that made her believe she could beat the charges? Prosecutors were frustrated by the development. They had offered Devon a deal that would have spared everyone the pain and expense of a lengthy trial. Now they would have to present the full case to a jury and push for the maximum penalty. The defense, meanwhile, seemed energized by Devon's decision. Draskowicz doubled down on his theory that Deviierre was the real killer. He argued that Devon had initially pleaded guilty because she was protecting her husband, but now perhaps she had realized that Deviierre wasn't worth protecting, or perhaps she had simply decided that she deserved her day in court. Whatever her reasoning, the trial resumed, with Devon pleading not guilty to all charges. As the case continued, the media attention intensified. The story had all the elements that make for sensational headlines. A former adult film star, a love triangle involving a stepson, a brutal decapitation, a missing head that had never been found. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Cable news programs discussed the case. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to analyzing the evidence. Online forums buzzed with speculation about what had really happened. Some people believed Devon was guilty beyond any doubt. Others thought the defense's theory about Deviierre was plausible. A few conspiracy theorists even suggested that someone else entirely had killed Jonathan, framing both Devon and Deviierre in the process. But beyond the media circus and the public speculation, there was a real human tragedy at the center of this case. Jonathan Wulette was dead, murdered in his own home in the most brutal fashion imaginable. His head had been taken and disposed of somewhere, denying his family the ability to lay him to rest with dignity. His two children had lost their father, and not just lost him, but lost him in a way that would traumatize them for the rest of their lives. They would grow up knowing that their father had been decapitated. They would grow up knowing that their own mother was accused of the crime. They would grow up in a world where their half-brother, who was also their stepfather, might also be involved in some way. How do you process that kind of trauma as a child? How do you move forward when your family has been destroyed in such a spectacular and horrifying way? Child psychologists brought in to evaluate the children reported that they were struggling immensely. They had nightmares. They had trouble concentrating in school. They asked questions that no child should have to ask. Did mom really kill dad? Why did she cut off his head? Where is dad's head now? The adults in their lives had no good answers because the truth was too horrible to explain to a child, and the uncertainty around the case made it even worse. If Devon had simply admitted guilt and been sent to prison, the children could have begun to process and heal. But with the case still ongoing, with Devon fighting the charges and maintaining some level of innocence, the children were left in limbo. They didn't know what to believe. They didn't know if they should hate their mother or pity her. They didn't know if they would ever see her again outside of a prison visiting room. Deviierre, too, was in an impossible position. His relationship with his father was over, ended by both the marriage to Devon and, ultimately, by Jonathan's death. His relationship with Devon was now complicated by the murder charges. Could he stay married to a woman accused of killing his father? Could he support her through the trial, knowing that some people, including her own defense attorney, were suggesting he was the real killer? In the end, Deviierre made his choice. He filed for divorce from Devon. He released a statement saying that he loved Devon but couldn't continue the relationship under the circumstances. He insisted that he had nothing to do with his father's death. He said he was cooperating fully with the investigation, and he said he hoped that justice would be served, whatever that meant. The divorce proceedings were messy and painful. Devon, from her jail cell, contested the divorce. She wanted Deviierre to stand by her. She accused him of abandoning her in her darkest hour, but Deviierre was resolute. The marriage was over. He moved out of state, trying to start a new life, far away from the media attention and the scandal. He stopped taking calls from reporters. He deleted his social media accounts. He essentially disappeared from public view. Meanwhile, the trial dragged on. Weeks turned into months. More witnesses testified. More evidence was presented. The jury sat through gruesome crime scene photos and detailed forensic analysis. They heard from Jonathan's friends and family about what kind of man he had been. They heard about his struggles with the relationship between Devon and Deviierre. They heard about his love for his children and his desire to protect them. And they were left to decide who killed Jonathan Wulette. Was it Devon, motivated by a desire for a fresh start with Deviierre? Was it Deviierre, driven by anger at his father's rejection? Was it both of them working together? Or was it somehow neither of them, with the real killer still out there? The prosecution remained confident in their case against Devon. They had her admission that she hit Jonathan with the stick. They had forensic evidence placing her at the scene. They had a clear motive. They had no credible alternative suspect. In their closing arguments, the prosecutors urged the jury to follow the evidence. Devon Michaels killed Jonathan Wulette, they stated plainly. She hit him with a wooden stick, causing him to go limp and die. Then she decapitated him, removed his head from the scene, and poured chemicals on his body to cover her tracks. She did this because Jonathan was an obstacle to the life she wanted with Deviierre. She wanted him gone, so she made him gone. And now, she must face the consequences of what she did. The defense, in their closing arguments, urged the jury to consider reasonable doubt. The prosecution wants you to believe that Devon Michaels is a cold-blooded killer, Draskowicz told the jury. But the evidence doesn't support that conclusion. Devon admits to hitting Jonathan in self-defense during an argument, but she doesn't remember what happened after that. She doesn't remember decapitating him. She doesn't remember removing the head. She doesn't remember the chemicals. Why? Because she didn't do those things. Someone else did. And the most likely candidate is Deviierre Wulette, the son who had just as much reason to want his father dead. Don't let the prosecution railroad an innocent woman while the real killer goes free. Look at all the evidence, consider all the possibilities, and if you have any doubt about Devon's guilt, you must acquit. The jury deliberated for days. They requested to review evidence multiple times. They sent questions to the judge, asking for clarification on specific legal points. They were clearly struggling with the decision. Finally, after nearly a week of deliberation, they reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed as the jury filed back in. Devon sat at the defense table, her face pale and drawn. Jonathan's family sat in the gallery, holding hands, preparing for whatever came next. The judge asked the jury foreman if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of second-degree murder, how do you find?" The foreman paused, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The verdict in the case of Devon Michaels remains pending as of this writing. The trial has been one of the most sensational in Nevada history. Whatever the outcome, the damage has already been done. A man is dead, brutally murdered and decapitated. His head remains missing, a final indignity that his family must live with forever. His children are traumatized and will require years of therapy. His son's life has been destroyed by scandal and suspicion, and a woman sits in jail, either a cold-blooded killer or a victim of circumstance, depending on who you believe. The truth of what happened in Jonathan Wulette's house that day in August 2023 may never be fully known, but one thing is certain: this case will be remembered for years to come as one of the most twisted, disturbing family tragedies in American crime history.